Listen to me. There comes a moment in life when your mind becomes a battlefield and your heart becomes a prisoner. You carry fears that don't belong to you, worries that were never meant to be your burden. But today God is whispering, release it. Let me carry what you can't. You are not designed to drown in anxiety. You are created to walk in faith. So stop fighting storms alone. Trust the one who commands the winds. This message is your reminder that heaven is still in control. God never designed you to carry every burden, and deep down you already know that. You feel it every time your chest tightens under the weight of a problem you can't fix. You feel it in those nights when your thoughts run faster than your heartbeat. When you replay every mistake, every fear, every what if, as if worrying could rewrite reality. But worry has never rewritten a single moment. It only rewrites your peace. And somewhere inside you there is a voice that keeps whispering, this is not yours to carry alone. That voice is God calling you back to the truth. You were created to depend on Him, not to exhaust yourself trying to be your own savior. I know what it feels like to stretch your soul, trying to hold everything together. The family, the finances, the future, the wounds you don't talk about, the storms you didn't see coming. Life has a way of placing stones in your hands until your arms tremble, and then it adds one more. You start believing that strength means holding on, even when it's crashing you. But the real strength, the kind that rebuilds you, not breaks you, comes from releasing what weighs you down and handing it to the one who can actually carry it. God never asked you to be the architect of every outcome. He never demanded that you solve every crisis, heal every hurt, or predict every tomorrow. He simply said, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Not advice, not theories, rest. The kind of rest that reaches your bones, calms your mind, and steadies your breath. But worry tricks you. It makes you believe that if you stop thinking about a problem, it will get worse. It makes you feel irresponsible for choosing peace. It convinces you that panic is a form of preparation. But that's a lie. Worry is not preparation, it is exhaustion in disguise. It drains energy you could have used to build, to heal, to trust, to pray. God doesn't want worry to be your reflex. He wants trust to be your rhythm. And trust starts when you accept that you were never meant to live life carrying everything at once. You weren't designed with spiritual pockets big enough for every fear, every question, every wound. That's why God says, cast your anxiety on me, not place it, not organize it. Cast it. Throw it with force. Throw it with honesty. Throw it with desperation if you must. Your burden was never meant to be your identity. It was never meant to be your permanent companion. Maybe nobody ever taught you that letting go is not giving up. Maybe you grew up believing that to love others you must suffer silently. Maybe you learned that being strong means being numb. But God is not asking you to be numb. He is asking you to be free. He is asking you to let Him take the weight that has been suffocating your joy. He is asking you to stop playing the role of the one who carries the world and let Him be the one who holds you. Every burden you carry alone becomes heavier with time. But every burden placed in God's hands becomes lighter, not because the situation disappears, but because He strengthens your heart to walk through it without losing yourself. The miracle is not always in escape. Sometimes the miracle is in endurance. Sometimes God won't pull you out of storm immediately, but He will pull the storm out of your mind. He will silence the wind inside you before He silences the wind around you. And when that happens, you realize the burden was never the problem. Carrying it alone was. Think of this for a moment. What if the weight you're holding right now is the very thing blocking your blessing? What if God is ready to open a door, but your hands are too full of fear to receive what He's offering? Release is not the loss of control. Release is the restoration of faith. When you put something in God's hands, it doesn't disappear, it transforms. He takes your anxiety and turns it into guidance. He takes your confusion and turns it into clarity. He takes your fear and turns it into courage, but He can only transform what you surrender. The world might teach you to trust your hustle, your grind, your strategy, but heaven teaches you to trust your God. Effort has its place, but effort without surrender becomes self-destruction. You are not weak for needing help. You are human. You are not broken because you feel overwhelmed. You are designed to lean on someone stronger. The sooner you understand that you were created for dependence, not isolation, the sooner you will experience peace that actually lasts. Is a freedom waiting for you on the other side of surrender. A freedom that whispers you don't have to live with this weight anymore. A freedom that reminds you that even if life feels out of control, God never is. He sees what you cannot. He knows what you do not. He goes where you cannot. And He carries what you cannot carry one more day. So today breathe. Loosen your grip. Place your fears, your questions, your battles, your tears, your uncertainties into God's hands. Not because everything makes sense, but because you're tired of pretending you can handle what has been hurting you. Let God be God. Let Him take the weight from your shoulders. Let Him restore the peace you thought you'd never feel again. You don't have to manage every detail, fix every problem, or hold every piece together. God has you. God sees you. God carries you. And the moment you stop carrying everything alone is the moment you finally start living again. This is your reminder. You were never meant to hold it all, only to trust the one who holds you. Trust begins where your strength ends. And this is one of the hardest truths to accept, especially for a heart that has survived many battles. We grow up believing that we must push harder, fight longer, stand stronger, and never show weakness. We are taught to take pride in our independence, to solve everything on our own, to keep marching even when our legs are shaking. But there comes a point when the weight becomes too much, when your own strength becomes a wall instead of a weapon. And that is the exact moment when God steps in, not to shame you, but to save you from carrying what you were never meant to carry by yourself. You see, trust doesn't grow in the easy seasons. Trust is not born on mountaintops or in moments of comfort. Trust is forged in the dark valleys, in the suffocating moments when your plans collapse, your voice trembles, and your heart feels like it is walking through fire. Trust grows when you have done everything you can and is still not enough. Trust begins where human strength ends, because that is where divine power becomes undeniable. God waits for the moment when your arms are tired, when your courage is bleeding out, when your solutions fall apart, not to punish you, but because He wants you to discover the strength that does not come from you. We think surrender is weakness, but in God's reality, surrender is strategy. When you finally stop forcing, pushing, twisting, and trying to control every detail, you open a door for God to move in ways you never imagined. As long as you cling to your own strength, you will only experience human results. But when you surrender, you invite supernatural intervention. That is where miracles begin. Not in your ability, but in your willingness to trust. God does not want you to be worn out, drained, and empty, pretending you're fine while your soul is collapsing. He never asked you to be invincible. He never asked you to pretend nothing hurts. He never asked you to hold your breath through the storms of life. He asked you to trust Him, to rely on Him, to rest in Him, to let Him guide you when you cannot see, to let Him carry you when you cannot walk. Trust is not a last resort. Trust is the very foundation of a life anchored in God. Maybe you've been struggling because you keep trying to be the strong one in every situation. You want to protect everyone, fix everything, avoid every mistake, predict every outcome. You want to control the storm, the wind, and the direction of the waves. But that is not your job. You were never asked to be the captain of the storm, only to trust the one who commands the seas. Your strength was never meant to replace God. It was meant to point you to God. The moment you realize that your limits are not failures, but invitations, everything inside you begins to shift. Your breaking point is not the end, it is God's entry point. When you reach that moment where you say, I can't do this anymore, heaven answers finally, now watch what I can do. God does not meet you at the peak of your power, He meets you in the valley of your weakness. He meets you in the moment when your heart is trembling and your voice is shaking. And He says, my grace is sufficient for you. You don't have to pretend you're strong when you're not. God's power is the strength you need when yours has reached its limit. And let me tell you something. Sacred. Trust does not mean understanding everything. Trust does not mean having answers. Trust does not mean seeing the whole plan. Trust means believing that God is already in your tomorrow, already fighting battles you don't even know exist, already healing wounds you haven't realized are hurting you. Trust means believing that even when life feels out of control, God is still in perfect control. Sometimes God will allow you to come to the end of yourself because it is the only place where you can truly see Him. As long as you believe you can carry everything, fix everything, and handle everything, you will never experience the depth of His strength. But when you finally let go, when you allow your tears to fall, when you admit that the weight is too heavy, you give God permission to do what only He can do, restore you, lift you, sustain you. This is why trust is born in weakness, because weakness reveals your need, and need reveals His presence. You cannot trust a God you don't depend on, and you cannot depend on Him if you insist on relying only on yourself. God doesn't want you to break, He wants you to bend. He wants you to release your grip on fear, release your obsession with control, release your addiction to being the strong one all the time. Trust is not saying, I have it all together. Trust is saying, even when I don't, I know God does. When your heart feels tired, when your decisions feel heavy, when the path ahead looks unclear, That is not the time to push harder. That is the time to lean deeper. You are not failing, you are transitioning. You are shifting from human effort to divine guidance. You are moving from, I can do this alone, to God, I trust you with this. And the moment you make that shift, something supernatural begins to happen. Peace replaces panic, calm replaces chaos, faith replaces fear, and God steps into the places where your strength stopped. Remember this, God is not asking you to be strong enough. He is asking you to be willing enough, willing to trust Him, willing to surrender the outcome, willing to believe that His plan is better, even when it looks different from yours. You don't need to have superhuman strength. You just need to give Him the weakness you've been hiding. Because what you see as an ending, God sees as a beginning. What you call a breakdown, God calls a breakthrough. What you think is the limit of your strength is the birthplace of His power. So today, stop fighting battles that belong to God. Stop exhausting yourself trying to control things that are beyond you. Stop carrying weights that heaven never assigned to you. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to be everything. You simply have to trust the one who is everything. And when your strength runs out, let that be the very moment your trust rises. For the end of your power is the doorway to His. Fear lies, God leads. And if there is one battlefield where this truth is tested again and again, it is inside your own mind. Fear doesn't need chains to imprison you. It only needs your attention. It doesn't need truth to control you. It only needs repetition. Fear whispers the same old lies until they sound familiar enough to feel real. It tells you that disaster is coming, that failure is inevitable, that you are alone, that you are unworthy, that the worst case scenario is just waiting behind the next breath. And the more you listen, the more those lies grow roots inside you. But fear has one weakness. It cannot survive the presence of God's voice. Because when God leads, fear loses its authority. Fear always speaks first, but God always speaks truth. Fear is loud, impatient, dramatic. It magnifies every possibility of loss and minimizes every promise of God. It exaggerates the storm and erases your strength. It paints images of a future where everything goes wrong and nothing is redeemable. Fear doesn't show you solutions. It only shows you catastrophes. It does not prepare you. It paralyzes you. It does not protect you. It suffocates you. But God does not lead you with terror. He leads you with clarity, with direction, with peace that lands in your chest like a steady anchor. Where fear pushes you into panic, God invites you into purpose. And here's the truth many people avoid. Fear is not just an emotion. It is a story you tell yourself. But trust in God is choosing a different story. One that aligns with heaven, not with anxiety. When fear says, what if everything goes wrong? God says, what if my plan is greater than what you can see? When fear says, you're not strong enough, God says, my strength is made perfect in your weakness. When fear says, you are alone, God says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Fear lies because it focuses on your limits. God leads because He knows His power. Maybe you've been living in a war between those two voices. You wake up with fear in your mind, but somewhere in your soul, you feel God pulling you toward peace. You take a step forward, but fear pulls you back with memories of past failures. You want to trust God, but fear keeps showing you old wounds, old disappointments, old battles you barely survive. But listen to me, fear is a terrible historian. It remembers the pain but forgets the victory. It magnifies the wound but ignores the healing. It keeps you stuck in yesterday while God is trying to lead you into tomorrow. Fear's goal is to confuse you, to cloud your vision, to make you doubt the very promises God has placed over your life. And when your vision is blurred, you begin to overthink. And overthinking becomes the devil's playground. You start imagining scenarios that do not exist, creating storms that haven't happened, fighting battles that are only illusions. But God leads in truth. He leads step by step, breath by breath. He does not give you the entire roadmap. He gives you enough for today, not to frustrate you, but to free you. Because if you had all the answers, you wouldn't need faith. And without faith, you would never experience His power. There are moments when fear will shout louder than God's whispers. Not because God is absent, but because storms are noisy. Fear thrives in chaos, but God leads in stillness. Sometimes His voice is quiet, not to hide from you, but to invite you to slow down, breathe, and listen with intention. Fear rushes you. God steadies you. Fear pushes you into rash decisions. God guides you into wise steps. Fear tells you to run away. God teaches you to stand firm. Fear will always exaggerate your obstacles, but God sees opportunities where fear sees problems. Fear says the door is closed. God says, I can open what no man can shut. Fear says the mountain is too high. God says, speak to it. Fear says, you will never recover. God says, I will restore you. Fear says, this is the end. God says, this is the beginning. And the more you walk with God, the clearer you begin to see the difference between the two voices. Fear drains you, God strengthens you. Fear confuses you, God aligns you. Fear enslaves you, God frees you. Fear destroys peace, God is peace. It becomes obvious that one voice pulls you away from your purpose while the other pushes you toward it. Right now you might feel trapped between fear and faith. That is normal. Growth always places you in the tension between where you were and where God is taking you. Fear will try to chain you to the past. God will call you into the future. Fear will tell you to stay where it's safe. God will tell you to move where it's sacred. And the choice is not easy because fear feels familiar. But familiar does not mean healthy. Familiar does not mean truthful. Familiar does not mean divine. Sometimes God will ask you to walk into places where your fear rises because He wants you to learn that the fear is lying and that His presence is stronger than anything trying to stop you. He will lead you into challenges not to break you but to build you, to show you that what you thought would destroy is actually the very thing that strengthens your faith. Fear says, you can't face this. God says, I am with you. Fear says, this storm will drown you. God says, I am your shelter. Fear says, this pain will last forever. God says, this too shall pass. And here's something powerful. Fear doesn't disappear when you trust God. It gets dethroned. It loses its power because it no longer defines your decisions. Trust doesn't mean you stop feeling fear. It means fear stops controlling your life. It means you stop surrendering to the lies and begin walking in the truth. It means you stop letting your imagination be the enemy of your faith. It means you start choosing the voice of God over the voice of worry. As slowly, step by step, God begins to lead you out of the confusion, out of the panic, out of the endless cycle of what ifs and maybes. He leads you through the valley, not around it, because the valley is where your faith learns to breathe. The valley is where trust is strengthened. The valley is where fear is exposed as a liar. And when you come out on the other side, you realize that God was not just leading your steps, He was reshaping your spirit. So when fear comes again, and it will, don't panic, don't surrender, don't believe the first lie throws at you. Lift your eyes, steady your heart, align your mind with God's truth. Fear may speak, but it does not get the final word. God does. And when you follow His voice, fear loses its power, and your life begins to move in the direction of purpose, peace, and divine clarity. This is your reminder. Fear lies, but God leads. Follow the voice that brings you peace. You can't control everything, but God never loses control. And the sooner this truth sinks into your spirit, the sooner peace will find its way back into your bones. Because one of the greatest sources of anxiety in this world is the illusion that you must manage every detail, predict every outcome, and hold every piece of your life together with the strength of your own hands. We carry this pressure like it's noble, like it's responsibility, like it's proof that we are capable. But the truth is, most of the things you worry about are things you were never meant to control in the first place. You are human, limited, finite, imperfect by design, yet you expect yourself to operate like a God who never sleeps, never breaks, and never fails. There is a reason life overwhelms you. There is a reason anxiety rises when you try to be the architect of every moment. You weren't built to be the controller of the universe. You were built to trust the one who already is. Your mind is not meant to carry what only God can handle. You don't see the whole picture. He does. You don't know the future. He has already walked through it. You don't hold the world together. He holds every atom in place with the force of His word. So why do you keep trying to take a role that belongs to Him? Maybe it's because the world taught you that losing control is failure. Maybe it taught you that unless you micromanage every possibility, everything will fall apart. Maybe it taught you that letting go is dangerous, that trusting God is a risk, that surrender is a sign of weakness. But let me tell you the truth. Surrender is not losing control. It is returning control to the one who never lost it. You are not giving up. You are giving God room to be God. Life will always present you with moments you cannot understand. Sudden storms, unexpected losses, painful detours, closed doors that seem perfect, answers that take longer than your patience can handle. And the natural reaction is to panic, to question, to doubt, to try to fix everything with your own strength. But what if the very discomfort you feel is God gently reminding you, this is not your battle to control, this is mine. God's control is not passive. It's not distant. It's not careless. His control is intentional, precise, and perfectly timed. Even when you feel like your world is sleeping, God is holding everything with unshakable stability. Even when you feel lost, God is guiding you through paths you don't yet understand. Even when everything feels chaotic, heaven is never confused. God is never surprised. God is never late. He works outside of time, outside of fear, outside of limitation. And that means his control is not weakened by your worry. Here's the tension. You can know this with your mind and still feel overwhelmed in your heart. Because surrender is not easy for a soul that has been shaped by survival. When you've lived through disappointments, when you've seen plans fall apart, when you've been hurt, abandoned, or betrayed, your instinct becomes protection. And protection makes you want to control everything. Every step, every choice, every possibility. But healing comes when you realize that your protection is limited, while God's protection is infinite. You cannot control everything to keep yourself safe, but you can trust the one who sees dangers you don't even know are there. Think back to your life. Think of all the times you thought something was falling apart, but later you realized it was falling into place. Think of the doors that closed, not because God rejected you, but because he was protecting you. Think of the plans that didn't happen, not because you failed, but because God had something better. Think of the moments when you felt lost, only to find out God was redirecting you towards something you didn't even know you needed. This is what divine control looks like. Not chaos, not neglect, not abandonment, alignment. You see, God's control is not just about managing the universe, it's about orchestrating your life with purpose. He is not random, he is not careless, he is not indifferent to your struggles. Everything he allows, everything he removes, everything he delays, every path he closes, it all has meaning, even if the meaning is hidden behind a season of waiting. Sometimes God protects you by blocking what you begged him for. Sometimes he saves you by disrupting your plans. Sometimes he loves you by disappointing your expectations. That is not loss of control, that is perfect control. You might say, but it doesn't make sense. And that's exactly why trust is required. If you could control everything, you would have no need for faith. If you understood everything, you would never grow. If every plan worked exactly as you wanted, you would never learn surrender. God's ways are higher, not because he wants to confuse you, but because he sees what you cannot. He knows who you will become before you've even stepped into the next chapter. And so he leads you with a wisdom that goes beyond human logic. Sometimes God allows storms not to destroy you, but to reveal what you are never meant to rely on. Storms strip away illusions of control. Storms force you to stop leaning on your strength and start leaning on his. Storms remind you that life is fragile, but God is not. When everything else shakes, his control becomes even more evident. And eventually, you will reach a moment when you finally breathe and say, I don't have to control this. God has it. And something supernatural happens when that truth settles in your soul. Anxiety loosens its grip. Fear loses its power. The future no longer feels like a threat. The unknown no longer feels like a punishment. Because the God who controls all things is the same God who loves you without limit. So stop trying to grip life so tightly that your knuckles turn white. Stop panicking over futures God has already planned. Stop trying to solve problems that belong to him. Stop exhausting yourself trying to play a role you were never meant to play. Let go. Not because everything makes sense. Not because everything is perfect. Not because everything is easy. Let go because God is holding you even when you don't realize it. Let go because his control is the only control that never fails. And when you release your need to manage every detail, you finally make space for God to move in ways he couldn't when your fists were clenched. Letting go is not losing control. It is choosing the peace that comes from trusting the one who never loses it. This is your reminder. You can control everything, but God never loses control. Trust the hands that hold your life. Your pain has purpose when placed in God's hands, and this is one of the most mysterious, challenging, yet hopeful truths you will ever learn on your journey of faith. Because when pain hits, it doesn't come with explanations. It doesn't arrive with clarity or instructions. Pain comes suddenly, violently, silently, unpredictably, and it leaves you with questions you never thought you'd ask. Why did this happen? Why me? Where was God? What possible good could come from something that hurt this deeply? Pain makes you doubt your strength, your path, and sometimes even your identity. But listen to me. Pain in God's hands is not wasted. Pain in God's hands becomes seed. It becomes transformation. It becomes testimony. It becomes the very material he uses to shape your destiny. When life wounds you, the instinct is to hide, to numb, to shut down, to pretend everything is fine while your soul quietly bleeds. But God does not ask you to hide your pain. He asks you to hand it to him. He doesn't want you to erase your wounds. He wants to heal them. He doesn't want you to carry your heartbreak alone. He wants to walk with you through the valley. Pain becomes dangerous when you hold it by yourself. But pain becomes holy when you place it in God's hands. You see, pain can break you, but it can also build you. It can harden your heart, or it can deepen your compassion. It can paralyze you with fear, or it can strengthen your faith. The difference is not the pain itself. The difference is whose hands it ends up in. Broken pieces in your hands will cut you. Broken pieces in God's hands will shape you. That is why surrendering your pain is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is choosing transformation over trauma, purpose over paralysis, and healing over hopelessness. We live in a world that glorifies perfection, a world that tells you to fix yourself before you go to God, a world that associates pain with failure. But God works differently. God does some of His greatest work through brokenness. He takes the cracks of your life and fills them with His strength. He takes the tears you cry and turns them into spiritual vision. He takes the moments that crushed you and uses them to build endurance inside you. Pain is not proof that God left you. Pain is often the place where you discover Him more deeply. But for purpose to be born from pain, you must be willing to feel what you've avoided, face what you've ignored, and place what you've collected into God's hands. God cannot heal what you hide. He cannot restore what you refuse to release. He cannot transform what you pretend isn't hurting. Pain does not disappear when you push it down. It transforms into fear, anger, insecurity, or bitterness. But when you give your pain to God, He transforms it into wisdom, empathy, resilience, courage, and faith. Think of every broken moment you've lived through. The heartbreaks you didn't see coming, the disappointments that shattered you, the loneliness that hollowed you out, the loss that stole your breath, the betrayal that bruised your trust, the nights you didn't think you'd survive. Those moments didn't destroy you, even though it felt like they would. They shaped you. They carved depth into you. They awakened prayers inside you. They forced you to grow, to reflect, to reset, to rise. Sometimes God allows pain because it is the only thing strong enough to move you. You stay in places too long, cling to people who cannot walk with you, settle for less than what He has planned, tolerate things that wound your soul. And so God allows shaking, not to harm you, but to shift you, not to break you down, but to break you free. Pain often becomes the transportation God uses to move you toward your calling. Pain also gives birth to compassion. When you've suffered, you see the suffering of others differently. You speak with tenderness, listen with patience, and love with more depth. You stop judging, you stop rushing, you stop dismissing, you start understanding. Pain softens your heart in ways comfort never could. You become a vessel for healing because you know what it feels like to be wounded. And that is purpose too. But maybe the greatest purpose of pain is this. It teaches you to trust God in ways you never have before. When everything is good, trust is easy. But when everything is falling apart, trust becomes a decision that shapes your destiny. Pain pushes you to the end of yourself. And that's where God meets you with strength you didn't know you had, peace you didn't know existed, and hope you didn't think you would ever feel again. There are chapters of your life that won't make sense until you look back years later and say, if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be who I am. If that hadn't broken me, I wouldn't have discovered God like I did. If that season hadn't hurt me, I wouldn't be standing where I'm standing now. Purpose reveals itself slowly, but when it does, you realize the pain wasn't punishment, it was preparation. So whatever you're carrying, the grief, the heartbreak, the unanswered questions, the silent nights, place it in God's hands. Not because you understand it, but because you're tired of carrying it alone. Let Him turn your wounds into wisdom. Let Him rewrite the story you thought was ruined. Let Him show you that even the most painful chapters can become the most powerful testimonies. This is your reminder. Your pain has purpose when placed in God's hands. Let Him transform what tried to break you. When you finally understand that trust is not a lightning bolt of emotion, but a daily, deliberate, disciplined decision, something inside you begins to shift. You stop waiting for a perfect moment of peace to appear out of nowhere, and you start choosing peace even when your world looks like it's falling apart. Trusting God is not an instant transformation. It's a steady practice, a spiritual muscle. You grow one sunrise at a time. Some mornings you wake up full of faith, ready to conquer mountains. Other mornings you wake up with your chest tightened, your doubts screaming louder than your hope. But that's exactly where trust becomes real. When you don't feel strong, when you don't see evidence, when nothing inside you wants to believe, yet you still say, God, I choose you today. Trust is not built in the easy seasons. Anyone can believe when everything is working. Trust is sculpted in the dark valleys where answers are missing and silence feels heavy. It's forged when you pray and the storm doesn't stop, when you obey and things get harder, when you move forward and the path gets narrower. But God never said trust would be painless. He said it would be powerful. He said it would shift atmospheres inside your soul. It would change how you walk, how you breathe, how you see every battle. Trust reprograms your spirit. It rewires your fear into courage and your chaos into clarity. It teaches you that faith isn't a reaction. It's a decision you make before your feet hit the floor. You don't wait for trust. You cultivate it. You build it like a rhythm. Slow, intentional, unshakable. Every day you surrender what you can't fix. You release what's poisoning your peace. You silence the voice of panic by feeding the voice of God. When your worry says, "What if I fail?" Trust replies, "What if God carries me?" When fear says, "This is too big," trust whispers, "My God is bigger." When your heart says, "I am breaking," trust answers, "But He is restoring." These aren't just comforting ideas, they are spiritual weapons, and each time you choose them, you grow stronger. You become someone who doesn't collapse when life attacks, someone who doesn't drown when storms rise, someone who stands even when everything in them feels weak. Some people think trust is blind, but real trust sees deeper. It sees beyond the present moment. It sees beyond the fear. It sees beyond the confusion. Trust is not closing your eyes. It's opening them to a bigger truth. That God is doing more than you can see. Just because He's silent doesn't mean He's absent. Just because you don't feel Him doesn't mean He's not fighting for you. Just because the story looks chaotic doesn't mean the author has lost control of the plot. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. His character doesn't change based on your circumstances. So when your emotions betray you, your faith carries you. When your doubt rises, your spirit remembers. When your fear attacks, your trust declares, "God has never failed me, and He won't start now." And yes, there will be days when trusting feels unnatural. Days when anxiety comes back like a thief. Days when your faith feels fragile. But trust is not about perfection. It's about persistence. It's about returning to God again and again. It's about choosing Him even after you've worried, even after you've cried, even after you've questioned. Trust is not the absence of fear. It's the refusal to bow to it. It's the defiance that says, fear may speak, but God has the final word. It's the discipline of turning your gaze from your storm to your Savior every single day, over and over, until peace becomes your culture, not your visitor. And when you practice this long enough, something miraculous happens. You begin to walk differently. You begin to breathe differently. You begin to live with a quiet confidence that doesn't come from your circumstances, but from your Creator. You stop trying to predict the future and start trusting the one who holds the future. You stop fighting battles alone and start letting God fight through you. You stop drowning in worry because you finally know that storms don't scare the God who commands the wind. That burden you carried for years begins to lose its weight. Your mind becomes a refuge instead of a battlefield. Your heart becomes a sanctuary instead of a prison. You learn that trust is not a moment. It's a lifestyle that transforms the entire landscape of your life. Trusting God daily means waking up and saying, "God, I give you my fear, I give you my plans, I give you control." It means choosing faith over feelings, truth over anxiety, surrender over struggle. It means you stop living like everything depends on you and start living like everything rests in Him. That's the moment peace stops being occasional and becomes permanent. That's the moment faith stops being temporary and becomes your identity. That's the moment you finally breathe again, fully, freely, fearlessly. And maybe today you don't feel strong enough to trust. That's okay. Start small. Start with one prayer, one surrender, one breath, one moment of choosing faith. Trust isn't built in leaps, it's built in steps. And those steps will lead you into a life you never imagined. A life where fear no longer rules you, where worry no longer controls you, where God becomes your anchor, your peace, your strength, and your certainty. That is the life you were created for. That is the life waiting for you on the other side of trust. And every day you choose trust, heaven moves closer. Every day you choose trust, fear loses its grip. Every day you choose trust, God writes victory into your story. So choose Him again today. Choose Him tomorrow. Choose Him every day after that. Because trusting God daily is where freedom begins. Necessary ending line, and when trust becomes your daily rhythm, worry finally loses its authority over your life.